The clip that exploded across the internet didn't come from a press conference or some polished highlight reel. It came from a raw, unfiltered exchange between Andrew Berry and the quarterback almost nobody believed in. An exchange that instantly pulled millions of fans into the center of a story Cleveland didn't expect to tell. The moment Berry walked up to Shedeur Sanders after that historic win, the entire vibe shifted. You could see it in the way Berry smiled like a man who'd been carrying a secret for months, and in the way Shedeur responded with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. It wasn't the typical GM-player handshake. It wasn't formal, it wasn't corporate, it was real. So real that fans stopped scrolling and watched it again and again, because it felt like the curtain had finally been pulled back on what's actually happening inside the Browns organization. What made the moment hit even harder was everything fans didn't see but immediately sensed. Beneath the excitement, there was a weight. Years of criticism, months of internal pressure, and a franchise's entire reputation hanging in the balance. Berry didn't just look relieved, he looked vindicated, like he'd been waiting for this exact outcome to silence every doubter who questioned why he drafted a quarterback others wouldn't touch until late in the draft. And as that video kept circulating, fans started to realize this wasn't just a happy post-game interaction. This was a turning point, a crack in the narrative, a quiet confirmation that something inside the Browns is shifting faster and more dramatically than anyone expected. But that viral moment was only the surface. What followed stirred up questions nobody in Cleveland was prepared to answer, because while Shedeur Sanders made history in his debut, the franchise's decision after the game sparked confusion, frustration, and a storm of speculation that spread even faster than the clip itself. And once people started connecting the dots, the story became much bigger than one win. It became a look into a team divided, a coaching staff under new pressure, and a quarterback who might have changed the entire direction of the franchise in a single night. Andrew Berry didn't walk up to Shedeur Sanders like a general manager checking a box after a solid performance. He approached him like someone who had been fighting a silent battle for months and finally got to breathe again. Berry took a storm of criticism the moment he used a fifth-round pick on Shedeur, and people didn't hold back. Analysts questioned whether the young quarterback even belonged in the league. Commentators claimed Berry reached for a player with too many unknowns. Even inside the organization, there were whispers about whether Shedeur would ever see meaningful snaps. Every layer of that pressure sat on Berry's shoulders, and when Shedeur delivered a debut that shattered 3 decades of disappointment, the relief on his face said what words never could. That's why the viral clip isn't just heartwarming, it's revealing. Berry didn't look surprised by Shedeur's performance. He looked validated, like he'd seen this potential long before anyone else did. His emotional reaction wasn't about one win. It was about everything leading up to it. The media backlash, the internal pushback, the constant noise questioning his judgment. For months, he was the only one willing to bet on a quarterback who didn't fit the mold Cleveland had been chasing for years. Seeing Shedeur step onto the field and deliver a historic debut gave Berry something no interview or press release ever could: undeniable proof that his instincts were right. Fans picked up on that energy instantly. That's why the clip spread so far, so fast. It didn't feel staged or polished. It felt like a rare window into the truth, into a GM genuinely invested in his quarterback's success, not because it looks good on paper, but because he believed in the kid long before the cameras turned on. And in a league where public interactions are usually stiff and carefully managed, that kind of authenticity hits different. It showed that this wasn't just a draft pick.
For Berry, it was a personal mission, a decision he was willing to take heat for, defend behind closed doors, and stand by even when the outside world dismissed it. That's why his reaction mattered. It wasn't a moment, it was a message, and the meaning behind it is only becoming clearer as the story unfolds. Shedeur Sanders didn't just win a football game, he rewrote a chapter of Cleveland history the moment he stepped onto the field. For 30 long years, every rookie quarterback who tried to win his debut ended up swallowed by the weight of the franchise's struggles. 17 attempts, 17 failures, and a narrative that seemed impossible to break. Then Shedeur walked in with only a week of preparation and snapped the entire streak like it was nothing more than background noise. Over 200 yards, tight window throws, calm decision-making, and the kind of poise that made even veteran defenders nod in respect, his performance wasn't just good, it was a complete break from the cycle of frustration the Browns had been trapped in for decades. What stunned people wasn't just the stat line. It was the way he carried himself from the opening snap. He didn't look overwhelmed or hesitant. He didn't play like a rookie trying to survive. He played like someone who had been waiting for this moment and was finally handed the chance to show what he could really do. Every time he escaped pressure, every time he found a receiver on the move, it chipped away at the idea that Cleveland needed a high-priced veteran to stabilize the offense. Instead, they had someone who looked unbothered by the spotlight and ready to command a locker room desperate for leadership. And with each completion, the conversation changed. Fans who expected growing pains started to wonder whether they were watching the beginning of a new era. Analysts who brushed off Barry's draft pick suddenly sounded a lot quieter. Even rival teams took notice because it's rare for a late-round rookie to walk into his first start and make the game feel like it's moving at his pace. The shock wasn't just that he played well, it's that he played like the moment belonged to him. What made his debut even more significant is how quickly it shifted the energy around the Browns organization. For the first time in years, the team didn't feel like it was searching for answers. They felt like they'd found one. And as the league processed what had just happened, the spotlight swung right back to Cleveland with a single question hanging in the air. If Shedeur could do this with minimal preparation, what happens when he actually gets the full opportunity he deserves? The moment the locker room celebration began, most fans assumed there was no question about who would receive the game ball. Shedeur had just delivered a debut so significant it snapped a streak older than he is, revived the stadium, and flipped the entire energy around the franchise. But when the announcement came and the ball went to Myles Garrett instead, the reaction online was instant. Myles absolutely earned praise. 3 sacks, constant pressure, and a performance that reminded everyone why he's one of the most dominant defenders in football. But the decision to overlook Shedeur during one of the most historic moments in Browns history created a wave of confusion that spread faster than the highlights themselves. Inside any NFL locker room, the game ball isn't just a souvenir, it's a message. It signals whose contribution defined the victory and whose moment deserves the spotlight. That's why fans couldn't believe it when the rookie who broke a 30-year drought didn't get recognized. To many viewers, it felt like a missed opportunity to highlight a transformative moment for the franchise. Some even suggested, purely a speculation, that the choice reflected deeper hesitation from the coaching staff about fully embracing Shedeur as the new face of the offense. Nothing has been confirmed, but the chatter grew loud enough that analysts started debating it on air within hours.
What made the situation even stranger was the timing. Cleveland had just watched a long-suffering fan base explode with excitement over a young quarterback who looked like he could finally bring stability after decades of chaos. To not hand him the game ball, even symbolically, struck a nerve. Fans called it disrespectful. Former players called it confusing. And the fact that the decision came on a night when the entire football world was focused on Shedeur only amplified the backlash. Myles handled the attention with pure class, but even that didn't quiet the conversation. The moment he accepted the ball, fans online were already asking why the player who broke the franchise's most painful streak didn't get to hold the symbol that usually goes to the story of the night. The controversy didn't overshadow the win, but it raised an uncomfortable question that Cleveland can't ignore. If this was Shedeur's night, why didn't the organization treat it like one? When Shedeur stepped in front of the cameras after the game, nobody expected him to drop a line that would shake the entire franchise. He wasn't bragging about the win. He wasn't celebrating the spotlight. Instead, he casually revealed something that changed the way everyone viewed his historic debut. He had only 1 week of practice with the starters. 1 week. In NFL terms, that's barely enough time to memorize the cadence, let alone build timing with receivers or master the weekly game plan. Yet he walked onto the field, played like a seasoned veteran, and snapped a losing streak that had haunted the franchise for 30 years. The way he delivered the quote made it even more explosive. He didn't say it like a complaint. He didn't frame it as criticism. He said it with the same calm tone he used all night, almost as if he didn't realize the earthquake he was creating. But fans noticed, analysts noticed, and the implication behind his words spread instantly across social media. Because when a rookie performs at that level with minimal preparation, it forces everyone to ask the uncomfortable question, why wasn't he getting those reps sooner? If he could do this after a single week, what would he look like with an entire offseason built around him? Some fans started speculating, again, purely speculation, that the coaching staff might have underestimated him or stuck too tightly to previous plans instead of adapting to what was right in front of them. Others wondered whether organizational politics played a role in delaying his opportunity. None of that is confirmed, but the conversation became impossible for the Browns to escape once the quote began circulating, and the more people replayed it, the more it highlighted a truth that couldn't be ignored. Cleveland might have been sitting on the answer to their quarterback problems all season without fully realizing it. That's why his "it gets dangerous" comment hit with such force. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact. If this was the result of a rushed week of preparation, imagine what happens when he actually gets to build chemistry, timing, and control over the offense. That line didn't just excite fans. It raised the stakes for the entire organization. Because now, everyone in Cleveland knows exactly what the Browns might be capable of, and exactly what they risk losing if they don't handle this moment correctly. By the time the dust settled after Shedeur's debut, the heat on Kevin Stefanski and his coaching staff had gone from background noise to a full-blown spotlight. Fans weren't just celebrating the win, they were demanding answers. If Shedeur could walk in with only a week of preparation and play with that level of poise, why wasn't he given a real shot earlier? Why wasn't he getting first-team reps in training camp? And why did it take a near-desperate moment in the season for the staff to finally hand him the offense? The questions weren't just coming from fans. Analysts were echoing the same concerns, pointing out how unusual it is for a rookie this composed to be kept on standby for so long.
None of these questions have confirmed answers, but the speculation became impossible for the Browns to ignore. Some fans began wondering if the coaching staff had been too loyal to previous decisions, holding on to an old depth chart instead of adjusting to what the roster actually needed. Others suggested the staff may have underestimated Shedeur's readiness, sticking to a conservative approach rather than taking a calculated risk. Whatever the truth may be, the optics weren't great, especially when paired with the game ball controversy, which many felt added another layer of tension between what Shedeur earned and what he received. Meanwhile, Andrew Berry's reputation only strengthened in the aftermath. The contrast between the front office's belief in Shedeur and the coaching staff's cautious use of him became hard to ignore. Berry looked like the visionary who spotted value where others didn't. Stefanski, fairly or not, looked like the one dragging his feet. And in the NFL, perception can be just as powerful as reality. Suddenly, people weren't just praising the rookie quarterback, they were questioning whether the staff around him was maximizing the talent sitting right in front of them. This is the pressure cooker the Browns now find themselves in. Every decision Stefanski makes from here on out will be viewed through the lens of whether he's fully committed to Shedeur or still holding on to the past. Because after a debut that electrified the entire league, anything less than giving him the keys to the offense feels like risking not only team momentum, but also the trust of a fan base that finally sees a glimmer of hope. Long after the final whistle, when the noise of the stadium faded and the cameras started drifting toward the tunnel, another moment surfaced. One that wasn't about stats, strategy, or coaching decisions. It was simply about family. Deion Prime Sanders was waiting in the shadows of the hallway, standing just outside the swarm of players and reporters, and the second Shedeur turned the corner,
everything else disappeared. The pride on Dion's face wasn't the kind you see in interviews or on highlight reels. It was the kind only a father feels when he watches his son rise through doubt, pressure, and expectation to make history in real time. When they finally reached each other, the energy shifted. People nearby instinctively stepped back, giving them the space they didn't even have to ask for. It wasn't a loud celebration, it wasn't some dramatic scene. It was quiet, emotional, and deeply personal. Shedeur wasn't speaking as the Browns' new star quarterback, and Dion wasn't speaking as a Hall of Famer. They were simply a father and son sharing a moment they'd both dreamed about long before the NFL ever called their names. And that's exactly why the clip spread across social media like wildfire, because it felt pure. It felt real in a way pro sports rarely allow anymore. What made the moment even more powerful was the journey behind it. Shedeur has carried the weight of being Prime's son his entire life, a title that comes with expectations most players could never shoulder. Every time he takes the field, comparisons follow him whether he wants them or not. But in that tunnel, none of that mattered. It wasn't about legacy or pressure. It was about a father seeing his child step into his own identity, not as a reflection of him, but as someone who just carved out a story uniquely his own. Fans felt that, players felt that, even neutral observers admitted the moment left a mark. And in a night full of debates, analytics, and controversy, this was the one scene that cut through the noise. It reminded people that behind every headline and every argument about the Browns' future, there's a young man who worked for this moment and a family that supported him through every step. In a world where so much of sports feels scripted, this was one of those rare flashes of honesty that needed no explanation, and that's exactly why it broke the internet.
Inside the locker room, the atmosphere around Shedeur wasn't the awkward, uncertain energy that usually surrounds a rookie stepping into a major role. It felt like the opposite. Teammates who had just gone through a physically exhausting game kept drifting toward him, offering quick remarks, smiles, and nods that said far more than any public statement. Veterans who've seen countless quarterbacks come and go reacted to Shedeur with something rare in Cleveland: genuine confidence. They weren't treating him like a temporary solution or a kid still trying to earn his stripes. They were treating him like the guy. Myles Garrett's post-game comments made that even clearer. He praised the entire defense, acknowledged the night was special for breaking records, and then shifted the spotlight back toward the team's younger players, especially Shedeur. There was no ego in his words, no sense that he felt the rookie had taken attention away from his own dominant performance. Instead, he spoke like a leader who understood exactly what this win meant for the franchise. And while he accepted the game ball with complete humility, it didn't go unnoticed that he made sure to highlight how big the night was for everyone, including the quarterback who helped make it happen. Several players were seen checking in on Shedeur throughout the celebration, and their reaction said a lot about where the locker room stands. When a rookie commands respect instead of just receiving courtesy, that's when you know something is shifting. Linemen talked about how calm he was in the huddle. Receivers mentioned the trust he showed on tight throws. Even defensive players commented on how his composure made the entire team feel steadier, like the offense finally had a pulse again. That kind of support doesn't appear out of nowhere, especially not in a team that's cycled through quarterbacks for decades. What made things even more interesting were the quiet glances and subtle exchanges between players during interviews. Some of them looked like they were already imagining what the team could become with Shedeur under center permanently. Others seemed relieved to finally see a spark of stability at the most important position in football. And while nobody openly criticized the previous starters or coaching decisions, the energy in the room hinted at something deeper. The players might already believe Shedeur gives them the best chance to win. If that's the case, the pressure on the organization becomes even heavier. Because once a locker room rallies behind a quarterback, especially one this young, it becomes nearly impossible to pull him out of the lineup without causing tension. And from the way these players reacted, it's clear they're not just supporting Shedeur as a teammate. They're embracing him as a leader who walked into chaos, kept his cool, and showed he belongs on that field. In the days following Shedeur's explosive debut, the Browns suddenly found themselves facing a decision bigger than any single game.
They aren't just choosing between quarterbacks, they're choosing the direction of the entire franchise. Keeping Shedeur as the starter feels like the obvious move to most fans. But inside NFL buildings, decisions are rarely that simple. There are contracts to consider, past investments, locker room politics, and the pressure of long-term planning. But every one of those factors becomes harder to justify when the rookie who just stepped in looks more composed and effective than anyone Cleveland has put under center in years. That's what makes this moment so delicate. If the Browns ride the momentum and commit to Shedeur fully, they could be unlocking a future that finally breaks the cycle of instability that's haunted the team for decades. But if they hesitate, even a little, the consequences could ripple far beyond this season. Fans have already made their stance clear. Analysts are pushing the narrative, and the players' reaction sends its own message. Pulling Shedeur now wouldn't just be unpopular, it could fracture trust within the locker room and spark a controversy Cleveland doesn't have the luxury of dealing with. The bigger issue is what Shedeur himself hinted at. His comment about "imagine what a full offseason looks like" wasn't just confidence, it was a challenge, a reminder, a warning shot. He essentially told the organization what he's capable of if they give him time, support, and continuity. If Cleveland chooses not to build around him after hearing that, they risk more than criticism. They risk losing the first real glimpse of a franchise quarterback they've had in decades. And if he succeeds somewhere else later, the regret would be impossible to escape. Andrew Berry's job becomes clearer in this scenario. He's the one who believed in Shedeur from the start, the one who trusted his instincts when others didn't. And now his draft pick has created the kind of momentum that front offices dream about. But for Stefanski and his staff, this moment is far more dangerous. Every decision they make will be judged through the lens of whether they're maximizing Shedeur's potential or holding the team back. In a league where perception can dictate job security, that spotlight becomes heavier with every passing week. This isn't just about who takes the next snap. It's about whether Cleveland finally embraces a future built around a young quarterback who brought hope back to a fan base that's been waiting for something real. Because for the first time in years, the Browns aren't staring into uncertainty. They're staring at an opportunity, a rare, fragile chance to let a player grow into the role so many others failed to fill. And if they mishandle it now, the fallout won't be forgotten. In the days following Shedeur's explosive debut, the Browns suddenly found themselves facing a decision bigger than any single game. They aren't just choosing between quarterbacks, they're choosing the direction of the entire franchise. Keeping Shedeur as the starter feels like the obvious move to most fans. But inside NFL buildings, decisions are rarely that simple. There are contracts to consider, past investments, locker room politics, and the pressure of long-term planning. But every one of those factors becomes harder to justify when the rookie who just stepped in looks more composed and effective than anyone Cleveland has put under center in years. That's what makes this moment so delicate. If the Browns ride the momentum and commit to Shedeur fully, they could be unlocking a future that finally breaks the cycle of instability that's haunted the team for decades. But if they hesitate even a little, the consequences could ripple far beyond this season. Fans have already made their stance clear. Analysts are pushing the narrative. And the players' reaction sends its own message. Pulling Shedeur now wouldn't just be unpopular. It could fracture trust within the locker room and spark a controversy Cleveland doesn't have the luxury of dealing with.
More dangerous. Every decision they make will be judged through the lens of whether they're maximizing Shedeur's potential or holding the team back. In a league where perception can dictate job security, that spotlight becomes heavier with every passing week. This isn't just about who takes the next snap. It's about whether Cleveland finally embraces a future built around a young quarterback who brought hope back to a fan base that's been waiting for something real. Because for the first time in years, the Browns aren't staring into uncertainty, they're staring at an opportunity. A rare, fragile chance to let a player grow into the role so many others failed to fill. And if they mishandle it now, the fallout won't be forgotten.